And I want to encourage you to turn in that Bible. There should be one around you to page 945 if it's our church Bibles. If you're using a recovery Bible, it is 1448. 1448, or Romans chapter 12, page 945 in our church Bibles. And if you haven't been with us these last weeks, we have been going through the book of Romans chapter 12 for like forever. And we're going verse by verse. We're going to get done eventually, but we're going verse by verse. We came to verse 14 today. And before I read that verse with you, I wanted to just share that one of the interesting things that has happened for Lighthouse Church is that within the broader community, Lighthouse Church is very much known as a recovery church. And I've always, that's all right. And I've actually always been a little bit careful to not just title us a recovery church, because we have what I would consider regular church ministries as well that go on. So I've always told people that we are a very recovery-focused church. So in most of what we do, there'll be a little bit of a recovery focus, whatever that means. But part of what we say here is that people recover from a variety of kinds of things through life. And the reality is that most people probably are recovering from something, or should be. And so when we talk about recovery, we use that in broad terms. And I wanted to tell you that because today's message, because of the verse we're going to look at, does have kind of a very specific recovery focus. But I think one of the things, if you can hang with me, that you're going to see is that this verse and this recovery focus has broad implications, because pretty much everybody here deals with what we're going to be talking about today, okay? So, with that, turn to chapter 12, verse 14. Did you find it in the Bibles? Romans chapter 12, verse 14, and I'm going to ask you to read just verse 14 with me out loud. Bless those who persecute you. Don't curse them. Pray that God will bless them. Let's read it one more time. Bless those who persecute you. Don't curse them. Pray that God will bless them. I'm going to have you leave your Bible open because we're going to come back to that in a little while. So I'm going to start with a joke, and with fear and trepidation, I am going to share it with you because I've told it twice now at the previous services, and it's bombed. And I know that you're going to redeem me. I thought it was pretty funny. But I think I'm telling it to a crowd who's taken it too personally. So I'm just telling you that ahead of time. All right. So Mark writes these words. Only last week in a local pub, I bumped into Ricky. We chatted over a pint, and he surprised me by announcing, Mark, Rosie and I are getting a divorce. I was stunned. Why? What happened? You two seemed so happy. Well, Ricky stated, ever since we got married, Rosie has been trying to change me. She got me to stop drinking, stop smoking, running around till all hours of the night, and even more. She taught me how to dress well, enjoy the fine arts, gourmet cooking, classical music, and how to invest in the stock market. Are you a little bitter that she spent so much time trying to change you? I asked. No, I'm not bitter, Ricky said. Now that I'm so improved, Rosie just isn't good enough for me. Actually, I need that sheet for later. See, I think it's just too personal for you all. That's what I think. All right. We're going to have our question now. Your poor senses of humor. And we actually have a very personal question, though, today. So we'll make a shift here. And I'm hoping that a few of you can help get us started. If you've never been here before, we ask a question every week, and you're invited to contribute to the service by answering it. And we'll take a few answers today. Do you have a brief story of a resentment or an amends? And get these guys' attention. You stand up, speak directly into the mic, and give us a brief answer. And if If a few of you'd be willing to share and be transparent, that would be great. And we're going to start with Cheryl.
I'm Cheryl, alcoholic addict.
Hi, Cheryl.
One of my biggest resentment was against my dad for him not being there and him having affairs with my other ladies. And today I love my dad and I have forgiven him. I know he was sick.
Thank you, Cheryl.
All right. Mine's kind of crazy because I...
Hold the mic close, Ashley.
Okay, I've never done this. Stop it. I had a resentment with a mother, a family member, and just recently, like this week, we've made an amends, and I haven't talked to her in like 10 years, or my sister in 5. And I made this New Year's resolution this year that I was going to spend more time with my family, and family's coming from everywhere. Family I didn't even know I had is like reaching out to me, and it's just, that's God moving in my life for sure.
Thanks, Ashley. All right.
Hi, I'm Joni.
Hey, Joni.
I guess I have resentments against my family, and I'm really struggling with forgiveness. But I know I have to, because if I want God to forgive me, I have to forgive the people that haven't treated me very well. And what I learned in AA was when I say stuff that probably is inappropriate to someone, I have to go make amends. That's what I learned in the program. Thank you.
Thanks, Joni. Thanks for sharing that not all amends or not all resentments are resolved either. Yeah. Alan.
Hi, I'm Alan. I'm chemically dependent and a grateful believer.
Hey, Alan.
I actually only had 2 resentments that, I have more than that, but 2 of them that really weighed on me. My father and me, we haven't seen eye to eye since I was an addict because he doesn't have an addictive personality, so I don't know where it came from on my end. But I reached out to him right before Christmas, and this is the first time we talked in 12 years. And my second resentment and my amends was with my addiction. Because my addiction convinced me to do things that was outside of my moral compass. So once I forgave myself, it went away. So with that, I'll thank you.
Alan, thank you. It's good to see you. That's okay.
My name is Laura, and I'm definitely an addict. One thing I have to give amends to is God right now. I've been walking away from God for a while, and from my recovery, and I'll tell you, in 2 weeks ago, thank God for this church and other churches and the program of recovery, because I almost drank and went back out there, and I was ready to just throw the towel and never come back. So my amends and resentment is towards God right now, and I'm struggling with the walk with God right now, and I know I need to make amends with Him. And there's other things in my life I need to make amends, but I'm really struggling, and I know if I keep on this path with God, I will get through this.
Thank you for sharing that.
My name is Cindy, and I carried this for a long, long time. In 93, I lost my grandma, and I was mad at God for like 10 years. I hated God because He took my grandma, and my grandma was like my rock. And so I was mad at God, and finally, I don't know what I came to my senses, and I thought I have to forgive God because, I mean, God loved me first. So I went to this church, and I had intercessory healing, and I forgive God. And the second person was just happened recently was my first boyfriend, which I had a child with, and my child is now 43 years old, and we just made amends, and I just now had to forgive him after 43 years.
Thank you, Cindy. Okay, I think we can do one more. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jamie.
Hey, Jamie.
I guess the biggest resentment I've carried with me in my life is with my mother. And just recently when I started this walk in recovery, I realized that, my mom was sick just like I was, or am. I haven't done things to people like she did to me, but today I can stand here and say that I forgive her for the sexual abuse.
Thank you, Jamie. All right, Jeff. Okay, we'll do one more. One more.
Hi, everybody. My name is David. I prefer Avi, but story of a resentment. I had a business dealing with a man in Jacksonville, Florida, and it so soured my life that I kept this thing going for, about 12 years. You know, and I was going to go and confront this man, and you know what I've said. I was going to do him grievous bodily harm. And I kind of had a plan, you know, but I called to see that, you know, if I was going to go over and do this thing, that he would be there. And I called and asked to speak with him. And at his place of work, family business, and I was told that he had passed away 9 years before. I had carried a resentment against somebody who had been dead 9 years, you know, without even knowing it. And now I pray that, you know, I hope he's in heaven, and I hope he can forgive me.
That's a great story. Thank you. All right, those were all helpful. I appreciate it a lot. So we are going to actually start this morning by looking at a couple of the 12 steps. And so that's kind of why I gave you a little prep about being a recovery church, or a church focused on recovery. And today I want to talk a little bit about two of the 12 steps, because they really pertain to this lesson. And I think that they're going to show you how relevant these 12 steps that we deal with, some of us on a daily basis, really are to all of life. So I'd like you to read step 8 with me out loud. Step 8. We made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. And step 9. We made direct amends to such people whenever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. I'm going to tell you a secret about me. I hate those two steps. I loathe steps 8 and 9. I think most of you know that I attend regular meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. At most of the meetings I attend, we deal with a step a month. The number of the step correlates with what number of the month we are in. So in January, we deal with step 1. In February, we deal with step 2. You got the idea? In March, we deal with? Someone say, I'm not an idiot, Dale. All right. So I actually think this idea is brilliant. Every year, if you attend regular meetings, you intentionally work through all 12 steps. I think it's brilliant until we get to August and September. And truth be told, I've come to hate August and September, because we deal with those two steps that deal with amends. For 2 whole months, we talk about resentments and making amends in steps 8 and 9. And so here's what I want you to know. I've started to resent August and September. Turn and tell your neighbor, I get that. Now, it's not that I have that many resentments, I want to tell you. In fact, I think August and September may now be my biggest resentment. Turn and tell your neighbor, good grief, I hope he moves on. All right, I got the message. Okay, so I don't have that many resentments, but there are still a few that I wrestle with on a regular basis. And I also know, when I think about it honestly, that my addiction and my actions affected a lot of people, some of them very significantly. And I know I've apologized, and I've kind of done my best, as I've kind of navigated life since my own particular story. And yet I'm aware that for many people, particularly in my former church, there's really some unfinished business. And I'm wondering if you kind of get a sense of that in your own life, that sometimes, even though when we've done amends or we've kind of worked through some of the issues that we're working through, there still seems to be some unfinished business that we have. Now, I want you to know that I feel very healthy, like I'm in a healthy place regarding, steps 8 and 9 and the amends that I have had to do and the resentments that I have. But every August and September, every step study I go through these feelings and emotions of thinking about the people who have hurt me and the people that I know that I have hurt, whom more amends still may be in the future. Does anybody here identify with what I'm talking about? Okay. So if that's you, if you understand kind of what I'm talking about, there's like unfinished business still regarding these things. I think that means you're a human being if you do. I want you to grab your little sticky note and I want you to get it out. And here's what we're going to do. Right now, we're going to start thinking about who those people are that we may have a little bit of unfinished business with. Maybe some amends, they've hurt us, or maybe we've hurt them. And maybe somebody comes right to mind. I just encourage you to jot that down on your piece of paper. We're going to come back to it at the end, but I'm just going to give you a chance right now to maybe write some. This is just between you and God right now. Nobody else should look. Don't look at the other people's pieces of paper. Did everybody get a sticky note? You need a pen. Borrow a pen. Somebody will give you one. All right. So I want to say something, first of all, to those of you, my Lighthouse family, who kind of have life all figured out these days and life put together. Maybe you don't struggle with an addiction or codependency. I want to share with you that one of the basic, I think, foundations of our work here at Lighthouse is that everyone in life would probably benefit from a 12-step program. And I think that working through the steps on a continuous basis has been one of the most profound experiences in my own life. And it has made me so much healthier emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. Now, I know that everybody who works any kind of a self-help program gets in their head that everybody should be doing the same program as they are. So I understand that. All I can tell you is that even the faith that I grew up with never gave me laid out as the 12 steps are, a spiritual means by which I can connect more closely to God and be a healthier person in my interactions with people. So I'm going to suggest that no matter who you are, that one of the takeaways you may get today is that you may benefit by joining a program that works through the 12 steps, like Celebrate Recovery that we have on Thursday nights. If you go to Celebrate Recovery, you can get into a step study where you get together with a small group of people and you work the steps intentionally. It might change your life if you do that. Also, our Recovery's Anonymous meeting on Saturdays at 4. It's a program where anybody can come, regardless of your hurt, habit, or hang-up, and work through the steps. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Today what we're going to do is we're going to specifically look at the people who have hurt us and the resentments that we might have with people in our lives. And so we're going to think about the people that maybe some amends has been made or needs to be made in our lives. And so with that, I want you to grab your Bible one more time, and I want you to look at Romans chapter 12, verse 14, because this is what we're going to focus on. Paul's word of advice to those who believe in Jesus, where he says, verse 14, bless those who persecute you, don't curse them, and pray that God will bless them. Now you may think, was that an idea that was original with Paul? I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 5. In our church Bibles, it's page 803. Matthew chapter 5, page 803. If you're using a recovery Bible, it is page 1204. page 803 or 1204, Matthew chapter 5. I'm at the end of the chapter, verse 43. And here Jesus says this: "You have heard the law that says, 'Love your neighbor and hate your enemy,' but I say, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. In that way you will be acting as true children of your Father in heaven, for he gives his sunlight to both the evil and the good. He sends rain on the just and the unjust alike. If you love only those who love you, what reward is there for that? Even corrupt tax collectors do that much. If you are kind only to your friends, how are you different than anyone else? Even pagans do that. But you are to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect." Kind of a challenging verse there at the end. So these are pretty strong words, that we are supposed to pray for people who persecute us, that we're supposed to pray for people who are enemies. And I was thinking about that a little bit this week, and I was wondering, does anybody here really have anybody who's persecuting them? Because I don't. Now, you may think that you do. In fact, if you're in trouble with the law in some way, chances are you kind of have this attitude that you're being persecuted. But often I think that we tend to blame others as a way of not accepting responsibility for where we are in our own life. Or am I the only one who's ever done that? And then I wondered, do we really have enemies? I don't think I have any enemies. I mean, that's a pretty strong word. I mean, I know that there are people who don't like me very much. And honestly, there are people that I don't like that much. None of you, of course, just to be clear. I have people who annoy me a lot. None of you, of course. So I thought, okay, so if we don't really have people, most of us who are persecuting us or who we would consider real enemies, so how can we make this relevant for us? And here's what I decided to do. I'm going to give you my paraphrase of Romans chapter 12, verse 14. So it's Dale's Lighthouse paraphrase, and my goal is that this will kind of draw us all in to understand what I'm going to share with you next. So here's Romans chapter 12, verse 14, as I write it for us. "Bless and pray for those who have hurt you, who continue to hurt you, or even annoy you, and for those you have resentments against. Don't curse them. Pray that God will bless them." Now, when somebody tells me that they are praying for someone that they resent, first question I always ask is, what are you praying for? Are you praying that they get into an accident? Or an anvil fall on their head, God says, pray that God would bless them, Paul says. Jesus says, pray that God would bless them. For those of you who come from a recovery program, you might have thought that this idea was original with recovery programs. It goes all the way back to Jesus. Bless those who have hurt you. Bless those who have annoyed you, and bless those you have resentments against. That's a pretty tall order. And so what I want to do is I want to spend a few minutes just talking to you about the truth and the reality of this verse and what it could mean for your daily life. And I know that a lot of you know this already, but exercising it or living it out is another thing. So let me share a few things that I hope are helpful for you because they're helpful for me. First thing that I want to share is this. Resentments often give control over my emotional and psychological and spiritual well-being to the one I resent. I'm going to say that one more time. Resentments often give control over your emotional, your psychological, and your spiritual well-being to the person that you most resent. You've heard it said before, resentment is giving someone else free rent in your head. And I want you to think about it for a second. This person's already hurt you, and now you're letting them control you today. They are in your head, and for many of you, that is a very scary place to be. So, for some of you, having an encounter with the wrong person, it can ruin your whole day. Is that anybody here? Or having an encounter with the wrong person can ruin a whole week. And what I want to share with you is that you are giving that person way too much control in your life. Now, I know it's easy for me to say, but we can make a self-assessment and decide, maybe I need to start, handling my response and reaction to people in a different way. I want you to think about how much energy it takes to harbor anger and hatred. So, you want an easier, softer way? It's working through resentments and letting them go. And so resentments often give control over your emotional, your psychological, and your spiritual well-being to the one that you resent. If you are harboring a resentment, the only person that you are hurting is yourself. And you cannot control that other person's behavior. You cannot change or control the past, but you do have control over the attitude that you're going to walk through life with. And so we need to kind of learn to take a better and a different perspective. So I read this about camels this week. Camels may build up a pressure cooker of resentment towards human beings until the lid suddenly blows off and they go berserk. Is that like anybody here? So what I learned is that in Asia, when a camel begins to build up so much anger and frustration that it's going to go berserk, the owner of the camel does this. He takes off his jacket and he throws it in front of the camel. And the camel then beats the heck out of it. It stomps on it and it flings it around and bites it and tears it into pieces until it's all out. And then they're kind of back to regular business. I also read that in some places in Japan and other Asian countries that they will often build up a mock caricature of their boss. And when they get really frustrated, they'll beat the heck out of it. If you work here, I would not necessarily suggest that. But if it helps you, I guess, I was thinking, one of the things that lots of us, especially if you grew up in this part of the world, this part of the country, we've never really learned how to deal with frustrations and anger very well. So here's number 2. Praying for your enemies will likely not change them, but it will change you. So if you need to kind of work on how you respond to situations, praying for them is the best way to do so. Now, it's funny because I talk to people all the time who say, I started praying for this person who I had this resentment against, and they started to change a little bit. And when we talk about it, what we realize is that they really haven't changed at all, but the way you're looking at them and the situation is beginning to change. You see, when we pray for people, it changes us. You begin to see other people differently. You begin to see the world and life differently. You begin to handle situations differently. And it's because prayer grows your trust in God and it grows your spiritual maturity. So I was thinking this week when I was at a meeting about the promises that I hear read every week at recovery meetings, and some of you do as well. And one of the promises that is read regularly at recovery meetings is this. It's going to be on the screen. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. And you know what that means? It means that as we pursue a spiritual recovery, God begins to change us on the inside. And the way we handle situations in life, the way we handle people in life should begin to look different. Not because they're changing, but because you're changing. That's an incredible promise. And so, you may be seeing, that the way you handle people, it's better than it used to be, or it's different. It's because God is growing something inside of you. And what I want you to know is that when you commit to praying for the people that you have a resentment against, or that the people who have hurt you, God uses that to begin to reshape how it is that you function in your life. So it's that God grows you spiritually. The people and challenges of life don't really change. We do. And so we learn to navigate life in a much better way. So I'm going to just ask you to think about how is it that you do deal with anger or frustration? Do you blow up? Do you let it build up? Do you isolate? We have all these great, coping mechanisms. Do you medicate? That's why some of us are here, because we learn to medicate on those things. What I want you to know is that prayer is the easier, softer way. Number 3, festering resentments and withheld forgiveness only hurts you. And here's why. Because when we have a festering resentment against somebody or festering anger inside, it separates us from God. Have you ever noticed that? When I am struggling with people in my life, it's really hard to be close to God. It's hard to experience God's presence. Now, not only is it only hurting you when you have a festering resentment or withheld forgiveness, it kind of begins to grow in control in your life, and it grows darker and darker, and we grow unhealthier and unhealthier, and then we learn this truth that resentment is self-imprisonment. Here it is on the screen. Resentment is self-imprisonment. So, if you are in recovery, resentments, I want you to know, put you in a very vulnerable spot. I realize that this was a big part of many of my struggles for the first couple of years of my recovery journey. That I was still working through some of the shame and the resentments that I carried with me into my new life. And this is probably why the founders of programs like AA decided to make amends, both steps 8 and 9, so that I personally, because it's all about me, so that I personally would have 2 months a year to think about them. So think about that. In step 8, what do? You just put down on paper the people that you have some resentments against, that maybe you have some amends to make with. And in step 9 is when you actually decide if some action is appropriate. One of the things I want you to know, if I'm creating any uncomfortableness in this message with you, then perhaps it's time for a prison break. And for you to get out from some of that. And how do you do so? We're going to talk about that next. But, talk to someone or get into a program that will help you work through that. Number 4, if you have a festering resentment, begin to pray for the person, talk to someone, and ask God to guide you. In recovery programs, we discuss this stuff with a sponsor. You may want to talk to a trusted friend, a counselor, your pastor. Get the guidance that you need and the advice of someone you trust, likely someone who has been there already before you. Dealing with resentments is a process. That's what I really want you to know. I'd love to tell you that if you have kind of pent-up anger or resentments against somebody, it's not just a process or it's not just a thing where you flip a switch and it's gone. So I would love to be able to say, here's what you do. You just give it to God. Yeah, you do, and then you give it back to God 3 seconds later is how it works. It's a process that we go through. And in my own journey, I've come to realize that many of the resentments that I have had to deal with, many of the hurts that I have both caused and received, they are for me to work through. That an amends will never come in a way that somehow just kind of lets all of it go. That it's just something that I'm going to have to work through perhaps the rest of my life. I trust that God will give me opportunities to heal and move forward as I continue to pursue Him and keep my eyes on Him. Now, one of the interesting things that I think we can do in our daily lives is that we can continue to do this on a daily basis in a way that's healthy. I want to share a quote with you. Some of you will recognize this quote. Others of you will wonder, where does this quote come from? We're going to read it first, and then you can see if you know where it is. So follow along. It's a fairly long quote, so I put it on the screen so you can follow along. So this is advice to those of us as we go through a daily spiritual program. When we retire at night, we constructively review our day. Were we resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid? Do we owe an apology to someone? Have we kept something to ourselves which should be discussed with another person at once? Were we kind and loving toward all? What could we have done better? Were we thinking of ourselves most of the time? Or were we thinking of what we could do for others or what we could pack into the stream of life? But we must be careful not to drift into worry, remorse, or morbid reflection, for that would diminish our usefulness to others. After making our review, we ask God's forgiveness and inquire what corrective measures should be taken. Where's that from? The AA Big Book, yeah. Might surprise some of you that would come from a program like Alcoholics Anonymous. What it is it's a kind of a roadmap to work through what is step 10. That is that we continue to take a personal inventory, and when we're wrong, we promptly admit it. And so I want to encourage you, if you've got a smartphone, Google AA Big Book, page 86, and save that into your phone, and do that with me every day. Do that with me every night. To think about those things that we just read about, and what kind of things from my day do I need to maybe deal with in a healthier way tomorrow. All right, last thing that I wanted to share, number 5, surround yourself with people who are dealing with resentments and striving to forgive. We talk about that all the time. The people that we surround ourselves with make a big difference in our life. If we're surrounded by people who are angry all the time or negative all the time, what's going to happen to us? We're going to be angry and we're going to be negative. If you surround yourself with people who are forgiving and who are striving to deal in a healthier way with the people in their life, you're going to begin to turn that way yourself. So I want to wrap up by sharing one more thing with people like Aurora and others, and that is that I know that for some of you, if you did write something on that little sticky note that you received, it might be God. And it's pretty common around here that people come into this church with a resentment against God that they're wanting to deal with. And here's what I want you to know. I'm not going to try to kind of explain God. I'm not going to try to justify God. All I'm going to tell you is that the God that I believe in is big enough to handle your resentment. And if you're angry at God, you can tell him, and it's not going to change how he feels about you. Read the book of Psalms. King David was angry at God all of the time. And, the God that we believe in, is big enough for you to turn to him and say, God, I am ticked off at you today. What are you on vacation up there? But here's the other thing that I want to tell you. Not only will he not turn his back to you when you do that, but he will draw close to you. Because you're not going to get any justification from God. All you're going to get is love and grace and mercy. And he's just going to keep showering that on you, and he's going to tell you that, you can be angry at me, that's okay, but I just love you. I just love you, and I want to be close to you. I want to hold you. I want to walk with you. And no matter what you tell me today, I'm going to love you just as much tomorrow. And so, if it's God that you have a resentment against right now, I just want you to know that you've come to the right place. And keep doing what you're doing. Keep coming. Keep being open to what God might be saying to you, and you will come to find some healing in your life. So if you still have that piece of paper, if you still haven't written a name or some people down that maybe you need to kind of just begin to pray for, that's what we're going to do with that piece of paper. We're going to take it and we're going to put it in a place where only we'll see it every day. We're going to start praying that God would bless the people that we have some resentments against, all right? All right, I hope you have a super day. We're going to stand up and sing a closing song. Slip.
It will be my joy to say, Your will, Your way. It will be my joy to say, Your will, Your way. It will be my joy to say, Your will, Your way, always. It will be my joy to say, Your will, Your way. It will be my joy to say, Your will, Your way. It will be my joy to say, Your will, Your way, always. I lay me down, I'm not my own. I belong to you alone. Lay me down.